I'm Janice Hostiger. After 3 decades in the marketing business and many years of being an entrepreneur, I've learned a thing or two about marketing. Join me as we talk about marketing, small business, and life in between. Welcome to My Weekly Marketing. As you know, hindsight is 2020. But don't you wish we had some clarity on things before we jumped into them or before we encountered them? Take entrepreneurship, for example. Google says that there are more than 80.6 million business and economics books printed in 2021. Obviously, that's quite a few. Granted, not all of them will be relevant to your industry or your struggle, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of wisdom out there available for the taking. But when it comes to growing our businesses, we can still get stuck. That's why I wanted to talk to Eric Holtzclaw. Eric is a visionary and an idea guy and the principal at Liger Partners, a marketing agency in Atlanta. But more than that, he's a serial entrepreneur with nearly 30 years experience who has a knack for founding companies. His startups have included a company that appeared on the Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing list 3 years in a row. Eric has talked to and met a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's given him even more wisdom about running and growing businesses and about entrepreneurship in general. So Eric's going to talk to us today about 10 lessons he's learned from talking to those 1,000 or more entrepreneurs. You're going to want to grab a pen and paper because Eric is sharing a lot of gold about business and entrepreneurship in this conversation. Here's my talk with Eric. So I love to start out learning other people's stories, how they got to where they are. Now, in the introduction, I'll talk about your impressive bio and all of that, but I'd love to know like how you had the vision to get in this industry, to start this business, to start many businesses, in fact. Sort of what is that motivating factor?
So it's really interesting because when I was 5 years old, I either wanted to be president of the United States or I wanted to work for IBM. Those were my kind of two choices. And I built my high school and college career in such a way that I ended up at IBM at a very young age. And so I'm in this big company working for a big corporation. I'm from Atlanta. IBM was the company to work for in that time period. And I found out when I got there that I kind of hated it. It was like too structured. I came in at 7, left at 4. Just I didn't know that I could see myself there long term. And so in that period of time, IBM was laying off a bunch of people. And that ended up with a bunch of companies getting started here in Atlanta. And I ended up at a startup that had been started by a bunch of ex-IBMers. So there were 40 people in the company, 30 of them were ex-IBM, 10 were kind of startup people, and met a serial entrepreneur there. And so I fell in love with kind of the small business category, entrepreneurship, spent a lot of time kind of following him around from business to business and then worked with another one and all this other stuff. And so I fell in love with some of the things that we did within those categories and started a company that solved one of the problems that I saw us run into in the businesses that we were in. And so that's just, I'm unemployable. Like this is all I've ever really done. I don't know that I've had a real job since the first one. And I like the creativity that comes with it. So, everybody often has like a hobby or whatever. And my hobby is work. I love building businesses and working through all the things. And I really don't see a connection or like a disconnect between the two. So it's just an interest to me. I love how things become, disrupted in the space. And so I've ended up, this company was an accident. I didn't mean to create it. In fact, I intended not to. I sold a business back about 12 years ago, and I was just going to be like the right-hand person helping other CEOs get their business to the next level, and accidentally started owning their marketing organizations as part of that process. So I was fixing their operations, and then they were asking me to take care of marketing. And then I had like 6 companies I was running their marketing department for, and that was not scalable. So I took my business and merged it with another, which is how we ended up forming Liger. So I wish it were, it sounds haphazard, right? Like but it's kind of been saying yes to a thing and doing a new thing and making it through it. And I don't know that I would do well in a large company or a large corporation. I'm not built that way. So,
And that's one thing I picked up on you right away. And just even from reading your bio is that you are definitely a creative entrepreneurial type person. So I was surprised that you said IBM because that's one of the most buttoned down
yeah.
companies, corporations in the world.
Well, my
So
parents were both big company people, and IBM was computers, and I was a technologist early in my career, and so like that was the place to be. Like that was the fraternity here in Atlanta, right? Like you ended up there, you had made it,
you made
right?
it.
And then
Mm-hmm.
I only stayed 2 or 3 years, and so when I left, my parents were like, "Oh my gosh, like who leaves IBM? No one leaves IBM, certainly not for a 40-person company." But once I got into that space, it felt right, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
That's very cool. I love that you just said the word disruptor. I was just on a client call, and that was one thing we talked about too. Is the importance of disruption in the marketplace, and talk more about that. And have you seen that? Like because we're talking today about 10 lessons from 1,000 entrepreneurs. Have you seen that as sort of a defining factor in successful entrepreneurships,
Yeah, I mean,
entrepreneurial ventures?
yeah, I mean, if you don't like disruption, you can't do entrepreneurship and small business. Like that is what it's about. You're either disrupting something that you see could be done better, you're riding a disruption, you're taking advantage. Like right now, of course, lots of people are talking about artificial intelligence and are we going to, and it's the same talk track we heard for social media, we've heard for the internet, like, companies who are not going to adopt it. And I'm like, right, which means you're making a choice not to be relevant any longer.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you are not thinking about that, and to be entrepreneurial and small business, often, you find those individuals or people who've decided to take advantage of a disruption or they feel like they need to disrupt something. So they've been part of a big business. They wanted to address a problem and they weren't allowed to. So they decided to go off on their own and do the brave thing, which is build a disruptive approach to it. So it's part and parcel, in my opinion, to it.
Mm-hmm.
And you think you're going to start a business and it is not going to be disruptive in all shapes, forms, and fashions of the world, you should not do it. This is not for the safe, like person who wants the 9 to 5 job with the separation between work and life and all that kind of stuff. Like it is disruptive.
Yeah, that is the truth. And I think that's something that we don't often hear, or at least maybe doesn't enter the consciousness of somebody who is going to say, well, I'm just going to start my business so I have more freedom in my life. It doesn't really work that way. Like once you're in it for a year, probably not even that long, a month, you realize that it's going to bend you every way, shape, and form. And it continues to as you grow for sure.
You talk about, 10 things I've learned, and freedom is a really interesting word because it's misused. When people say
Mm.
they think about freedom, for some reason, I think they think, oh, I'm not going to have a boss telling me what to do and whatever. No, you end up working for the worst person in the world, yourself. Not paying yourself well. You're working all these hours. The first 3 years are just like having a kid. The first 3 years, it's a toddler and you can't leave it alone. And, da, da, da. And then like that sounds bad. But once it gets between there, then the company tries to do things on its own and it makes you uncomfortable and nervous and you have to give up control. And so there's a lot into when someone says freedom, like what does that word mean to you? What does freedom mean? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Freedom for me has always been I'm unemployable. I don't do well with authority. So like I like to, which makes me a great services person because I come in and I'm willing to tell a client what I think and what's right and what's wrong. Like I'm not afraid of that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But my definition of freedom is I'll go on a vacation and I'm still working on things for work, but I'm also making a choice that I might be at a museum in the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If I
Mm-hmm.
had a regular job, I would have to ask for PTO and
Yeah. Yes.
so
Although you're right that it's so much like parenting. I've really never thought about that before, but like parenting, you grow it and you think, oh, I've got this figured out now. I've got this stage figured out now, and you're all happy about it. But the business continues to grow or it doesn't, which is a whole nother conversation. But, it's like moving from, the elementary school years to the tween years to the teenage years. And you think, what was I thinking? I don't know what I'm doing. You're just really learning on the job all the time. And then, and then you think you get that figured out. It's like, and then the next kid comes along. Well, not that you're doing multiple businesses, but oftentimes you are, or branches of which, and then you're like, okay, I thought I understood this from the last one, but it's very different. And so you're constantly in that learning mode. It's this continuous cycle. So I love that you said that, because freedom really doesn't ever exist when you have your own business, because it's always your baby in the back of your mind, like as you are with as a parent, you're always thinking about them in the back of your mind and worrying a little about them and whatever. So, but
Yeah. Well, and I give one of the speech that is based on this kind of top 10 lessons. I call it surviving the awkward in between years. So it's like, you think about with a kid, you have to survive the awkward in between years. You have to do the same thing with your company. And so many companies never make it out of the awkward in between years. Like if it doesn't die early because you had a bad idea or you ran out of funding or whatever, you get it to the point that it's kind of surviving, but not thriving.
mm-hmm.
The most dangerous, because you've ended up really building yourself a job. Like you wanted to run a thing and now you got a job and you can't leave it and you may not be paid, your fair wage and all those kind of things. So surviving and getting out of those awkward in between years is such an important part of it being successful and really being worth the effort.
Yeah.
Putting into it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so many service-based entrepreneurs fall into that trap. And I know I have, where you're just doing all the things or most of the things. And so you're always constantly working in your business, but you're never working on that business. And you're never, paying attention to that vision, or you're not enough, and setting up that roadmap to how you're going to get to that next phase all the time. But that's really interesting. Anyway, I kind of like tangent off, which just comes with being a little ADD. But so I know we're here to talk about the 10 lessons from 1,000 entrepreneurs. So I would love to know what those are, because I work with entrepreneurs. I am one. And any insight you've got, I am all ears.
Well, we have touched on a few of them, and part of the way that I came up with this is I owned a research company, one that I sold back in 2012, and I had been told by a marketing person that I needed to start standing on stages and talking about what I knew. And so I started a podcast. And because I was interested in entrepreneurs, I started interviewing entrepreneurs. And at this point, I probably interviewed 2,000 of them. I was on the radio for 2 years and I was interviewing an entrepreneur every single day and all that kind of stuff. And so what I thought I would learn from them is, the things they didn't have to be successful with their business were like, they didn't have enough money, or they didn't have support from their family, or whatever. And the lessons were very different than those things that we hear about. Because people will say, "Oh, I'd start a business if I had the money. I would start the business," and that's not true. Like you and I both know, if it's a thing, you're just going to end up doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And so, some of them are one that's an incredibly important one, and it comes from if you've read any like Michael Gerber's E-Myth or whatever, firing yourself. Mm-hmm. So entrepreneurs build these like self-made prisons, and unless you're willing to, fire yourself and figuring out how to like get other people to do parts of the business, then you're never going to be successful, because it's always you. You've really specific service-based businesses. People are buying you, and you need them to buy the brand or buy what you provide. It's got to be more than you. You may be the best salesperson for the organization, but the second it comes in, you've got to have other people who can deliver and talk about it and think about it, such that the client doesn't think they just bought you, right? That's just an important part. I learned that lesson. I was on a vacation, and I was the only person in my services company who knew how to staff if a project came across. And I had read Michael Gerber's E-Myth, and I came back and I was like, I'm going to fire myself from that job. And I gave it, now I had to take it and give it to 3 other people in my company for them to work it out. And it was painful to watch them do it. They didn't do it the way I would do it, but it was still successful, right? That does kind of lean into the giving up control. So like, how do you give up control? And I think about best first use of your time. If you think about the things you can do, but maybe you're not very good at them, the things that you can do that are second nature, like put them all into the different quadrants and determine what should I be giving away. And so outsourcing something, I'm a huge believer in outsourcing stuff like accounting and, payroll, things that are just going to drive you crazy that someone else is going to do and do much better than you are. And they're
Mhm.
not going to away and put, you can always tell the thing you should give away when it's the last thing you do every day or you always avoid it. Like
Mm.
it stays
Put it
on your,
off. Yeah.
yeah. That's the thing I need to get somebody else to do because I hate it. I don't want to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, those kind of things are really important.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I know I've done several different, I guess, exercises where you have a list of $10 tasks, $100 tasks, and $1,000 tasks, and it really is amazing. Even though I know cognitively what I should and shouldn't be doing, I still find myself doing $10 tasks because it just seems easier to do it myself than it is to explain it to somebody else, a VA, an assistant, whoever it is that you're working with, to just get it done. And, but that really, they do add up and it burns you out mentally, physically, emotionally. It just burns you out at the end of the day because you don't love it. And yeah.
You don't
So,
love it, you may hide out in it. So I will run into entrepreneurs who love one part of their business. So they just like continue to do it because they're not sure what their identity would be if they didn't do that part of it. And
uh,
so hiding out in the thing that you love, and that's holding back your business because you won't bring anyone else in to do it. Like you really do. It's, being an it's such self-reflection. It's like, because it's really you. Like if the business is a reflection of you, and you have to understand where do you get in the way, where do you enable and empower the business? Like what does that look like? And you talked about another trick I use, and this plays nicely. I implement EOS quite a bit, the entrepreneurial operating system, into companies when I'm doing operational work because it's a nice combination of all the things I did before there was a thing you talked about, right?
mhm, mhm.
But how do you know if you should turn something into a process? And it's the rule of three. So if it's more than three steps, if it's going to be
Mm.
done more than three times, and if it involves more than three people, it should be written down and turned into a process.
I love that. It's easy to remember too.
Remember, and it's a way to test for it. It's like, well, this is the thing I do like once a year. I'm the only one who has to do it. Like, do I really, need to teach someone that? Like, filing your state registration. Like, does that really
Mm.
really? That's not that hard, right? It's $15 at the whatever. But something you're doing like, oh, we got to do the P&L every single month, and it needs to go to these people, whatever those things are. Like, you can start to use that as a litmus test of things that are identified within your company that really do need to be processized. So, and process is different from like an operations manual, right? It's like, how do
Mm.
you, and then you may need more discrete steps to get to it. So, entrepreneurs are not often sticklers for detail or
Yeah.
visionary, a little ADD and all that. So, leaning into other people help you successfully get that stuff out of your head such that someone else can take it over and actually run it. So, yeah.
Yes. And document it so that you're not having to reteach it every time somebody new comes in and leaves. Yeah.
Well, that lessons again, treating your business from day one like you're going to sell it, because
Mhm.
something is going to happen to your business at the end of the day. It's either going to close, you're going to give it to someone else, you're going to merge. Like something is going to happen. Every business has an exit, and people think
Mhm.
about businesses like they do relationships. Like, oh, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, and it's like I really hope not. Like I really hope for you, no, right? Like maybe you
Yeah.
want be a party to it, whatever. But at some point, you're going to have a burnout because if you started a business, you think creatively, and you're going to try to rework things and whatever. So the only way for you to really get out of it is think of it as a franchise from day one. Like, how do I document what I do? How do I document what the business does? How can I teach someone else to do parts of it? And then that allows you to hand off things as you want, and also doesn't create almost a shell around what the business can succeed and what it can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I had that experience. We lived in Wisconsin for a while and I had a design firm, which morphed into design and marketing. But we moved locations and I was at that point just burned out. I was just like, I'd done it for a number of years and I was just ready to go. And I didn't have that in place. And so I reached out to a few people and ultimately I just closed the doors. And I really, really regret that now because I had a lot of great clients that I just let go. And so I think that's absolutely right. I wasn't thinking And in those days, I was not thinking about my business as a business should be thinking about themselves. It started out as freelancing and it just kind of morphed into something I did on the side when my kids were in school. And it was entirely the wrong way to look at it. And I paid the price for it, literally, by just having to close the doors because I just couldn't do it anymore. So I really, really like that one. And I think any entrepreneur out there, if you are taking money to do any task at all or any product, you really need to think big picture.
What's the exit look like? And you just,
Yes.
like, there will be one. There is some type of exit at some point. You got to move. You want to do something else. You like whatever it is. And so you have to understand that. And that it feels almost morbid, I guess, because people think they get so in love with their business, right? Like, and that is an important component too of what you do at the beginning of the business is more important for it at the end. And so when I talk about like creating your operating agreement, like your operating agreements, people put them together with business partners at the beginning and they're like, it's always going to be great. We love each other. We're never going to argue. And then 5-10 years later, you're like, where is that operating agreement? Like, who is in charge, right? And so you got to go back to that thing. So you need to think about the end in mind. Like, what does that look like? And in that category, knowing that you're defining specifically, I'm a big proponent of starting businesses with a partner. I do think that paired companies do better because you typically have someone who's good at outside and someone who's good at inside. Like, hey, this person's great at sales and whatever, and this person's great with the people. And I just see most of them. And if you go look at successful businesses, there's always, if they're not even mentioned, there's always someone else. Like there was always a second party, that was maybe keeping the fires burning at home, right? And so, but what I find in those is the partners don't do a good job of explaining what they think the end is. And so I'll give you an example. You and I could say, hey, let's go on a skiing trip. And so I said skiing. So you may immediately, because you used to live in Minneapolis, think of snow skiing. I'm a Southerner, water ski.
Okay.
You and I both show up at the car and I got water skis and a bathing suit and all this other kind of stuff. And you're wearing a parka and you brought like snow skiing. As I said, skiing. So we both think we're headed in the right direction in the same way, but we have not defined what does the word skiing mean. And so we start as a business partner and we're like, we're going to build a business and we're going to whatever. And it's like, well, what does that mean for you? Like, are you building a lifestyle business? Like you're going to get to a certain amount of income and you're going to be fine because you'd rather spend time with your family? Or are you someone who, like me, the more the business grows, it's a hit for me. Like I want to continue. It's really not about the money. Like it's about that's of the business. Like how does it continue to grow? And so being very honest and open with what you want, what that person wants, and understanding that you're both building towards the right and similar path is really important.
Love it. And getting it all in writing and make sure that your terms are identified. Because you're right. I totally thought of snow.
And I'm like, no, I'm snow skiing. I'm water skiing.
Like people go on water skiing trips. I have no idea. We just go to the lake,
Yeah.
Okay. What else is on the list?
Yeah. I mean, that gets us close because it is, thinking about all of you giving up control, making sure that, you are understand what you're in. And notice a lot of that is more about this retrospective feeling as an entrepreneur, which is kind of hard for us to do often because you get caught up in the spin of building it, of moving it forward. But you have to understand if you want to build something bigger than yourself, and it's actually okay for you not to. Like if you want to do a lifestyle business, great, but make sure that you're not building a very difficult to do lifestyle business, right? So like lifestyle businesses are typically people who sell insurance or whatever, and they have an annuity stream that's paying them. If you have to deliver those services over and over again, that is a tough lifestyle business. You really have to figure out how you're going to scale, scaling without failing. Like how can you scale it without failing? How are you going to bring in people? Those first initial hires are going to be really important. They're never going to care about your business as much as you do. Like they don't love it the way you do. It's just a job. And that's for entrepreneurs to understand too. It's like, but why don't they want to work 120 hours a week? Like, hey, lives. So So we're a special breed, those of us that do this kind of work. And specifically, I think in the services category, because it is about having a passion for something that you then want to like dedicate your time and life to. I love research and the research company. I love the marketing stuff that we do because you're able to take research and apply it in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a practice area that makes me happy and glad to do it. And I love the fact I have a team because they do the things I don't like. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what advice do you have then for somebody who maybe they're kind of like happy with the status quo? Do you feel like, let's say they are an accountant, okay, and they have their, I don't know, handful of customers, and they may have somebody that helps them out and that sort of thing. Is it sort of, do you feel like it's a grow or perish situation, or do you feel like, how do you handle something like that? I mean, do you have advice for somebody that is just sort of okay with the way things are?
Yeah. So the biggest finding that came from my however many entrepreneurs I talked to in the time is that entrepreneurs, true entrepreneurs, and I am not like if you're doing something that's more like a lifestyle business or whatever, you're still friend, but may not be as entrepreneurial, right? Because it is like a more of a franchise model or something.
Sure. Yeah.
There's entrepreneurs they're in two categories. So they are rectifies and magnifies. And so a rectify is someone who is trying to prove someone wrong that told them that they may not be as good as they thought they would be. They would never make it to college. They would whatever. And so rectifies build businesses for one reason. And then magnifies are people who think they're like God's gift to the world and they build businesses for a different reason. But there's typically some life circumstance that puts people in one of those categories. And those fuel people. If you go look at entrepreneurial stories, there's like something in their background. And so when I talk with someone and they're maybe having an issue scaling their business or whatever, I may find that they just had a really great childhood and things were wonderful. And that's amazing. That's good. That's probably someone who works like 40 to 50 hours a week. They love their hobbies. And that's way healthier. A lot of us entrepreneurs, because I'm a rectified entrepreneur, are like, still trying to prove someone else wrong. And it is important for you to understand it because you want to make sure you're doing things for the right reason.
Yeah.
So I've found myself in situations where I'm doing something to like fight that demon that lives in the rectify world for me. Magnifies are amazing. Steve Jobs is an example of a magnify. And the reason he is he was adopted. And he found out he was adopted around 8 or 9. So if you read his biography, he came into his parents and he's like, Mom and Dad, like I was adopted. Someone didn't want me. And his parents said, Steve, no, you don't understand. We chose you. They said those words to him. He lived the rest of his life as the chosen. Like whatever he did was right. Like he probably still would have been an entrepreneur. Like if they'd said, oh, you're right. Like we adopted you, he might have gone the rectify path, but because he was a magnifies build really, really big businesses. It doesn't mean that like, if you want to go start an accounting firm and work on your own, like Godspeed, but make sure you understand that, right? Like it's okay for it to not scale and be huge. It could just be you. You can make a bunch of money that way, right? But the second you start to bring other people in and start to think about it in a bigger way, you better go big or go home, right?
Yeah.
The effort and the energy you're putting into it may not be worth the payoff. And that is services businesses have to worry about that because a services business doesn't have the same valuation at the end of the day as like a technology business or a one that has an annuity on the back end of it or any of those kind of things. It is harder to sell a services business and get the kind of multiples you might hear about on other businesses because it's so often tied up into the owner. So yeah.
That is super enlightening. It makes me kind of want to just think about why I got into business in the first place. Although I think I just always dreamed of entrepreneurship, but my father was an entrepreneur and his father was an entrepreneur. So that was like the normal path in my family. And so I don't know that I fit into either one of those. So that's kind of interesting. I probably do somewhere.
What you could do. So you probably think because I'm a so my ring I wear, my grandfather was a huge entrepreneur. Now my parents were not; they worked for, but I definitely have his blood, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know how what I've done and how those businesses are reflections of things that are me working on solving previous problems or whatever, right? And it is there, you can just look, like I can look at a business and know if it's run by a magnifier or a rectifier. You can just tell.
That's interesting. Hmm. Yeah, I would say now that you talk about it, I think one of the things that my dad always struggled with was marketing. He was a doer. He was like in the business all the time. He loved just
Yeah.
doing the thing, So I think that may have something to do with it too, but I don't know. I'll have to
Yeah,
talk to
think
my
about like
therapist.
scarcity, or were there, obstacles you had to overcome, like some of those, and those
Yes.
tie very much into the way that the entrepreneurial mindset gets set. So it's those
Huh.
like nature, nurture. I really probably I'm on my fourth or fifth career at this point. My final career might be therapy because I really kind of like sitting and talking with people about those pieces. 'Cause
Well,
and that is, like, you talk about lessons, like an unaware entrepreneur, like that's a problem. When you have an unaware leader, like someone who is trying to do something for the reason that may not be as healthy, that impacts the rest of the team. And that's why you will see
yeah,
companies have that really hard person to work for. It's just because they're just not aware of the impact they have on other people, and you know how they're treating them and all those kind of things. And you have to get around that. You have to be able to look at yourself from the outside and be
yeah,
like, so when I say and do that, I create this ripple effect I didn't expect. So
yeah, yeah. You have to know your why. And it also makes good marketing.
yeah, it does. It does.
So having talked to all these entrepreneurs, do you feel like that the lessons that you've learned from them have impacted your own entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, 100%. Like that was such an unexpected. So literally, I was running a research company. I was the CEO. We had scaled to a point and we couldn't get above it. Like we were at a number where I couldn't get above the number. And so brought in a marketing firm to look at the company because I'm like, well, what's going on? Like we can't, and we thought maybe marketing was the thing. And she told me, she's like, hey, you really understand the business better than anybody else. And I was an operator. So I wasn't talking on stages. I wasn't doing podcasts. Like the fact that I'm on in front of cameras all the time and all that is crazy. Like that was not who I was. I was Wizard of Oz, right? Like I sat in the back and pushed all the buttons.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we're standing on stages and things. And so I started the podcast as a safe way to start practicing speaking and, answering questions and whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been one of the ways I've made some of the most significant connections, both with people externally as part of my network, and also learned the most kind of about myself and like what makes me tick and why I think the way that I do. And so, yeah, and that is, entrepreneurship is very lonely, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, being an entrepreneur, if you remember the movie Big Chill, he said he's an entrepreneur. I mean, and all of his friends say, oh, that means you're unemployed, right? An entrepreneur nowadays is this rock star status. And so everybody sees it as glamorous and whatever. And it isn't. It is not a glamorous thing. It's a great thing to do, but you end up in rooms talking to yourself often. It's like, hey, Eric, what would you do? I don't know, Eric, what would you do? Get yourself out and start talking with other people and just being a little uh, being vulnerable with them. You'll find they're
Mm.
same problems and they can
Yeah.
commiserate. And so I talk about informal board of advisors. So who are the people that you're going to
Mm.
call? Like I have one person I call and she thinks anything and everything I want to do is an amazing idea. Another person I call who thinks every idea I have is stupid and dumb, right? Typically call somebody who's in the industry, right? So like you're getting that advice, but you got to get outside your own head, and that's going to make you better and your business better.
That is so, so true. And probably I would say even beyond your spouse.
Your spouse is too tied up in it.
Yeah, yeah,
With everybody, I keep pulling my spouse into the company. She's been in a couple of mine. So like we live, breathe, and eat it. And then you're
yeah,
like, yeah, you got to get outside
yeah,
that.
yeah, for sure. That's, I didn't realize that entrepreneurs were rock stars now. So that's kind of cool.
The thing everybody wants to be. I'm like, it's not that sexy.
I'll wear that with pride.
Yeah. It's not all like Mark Cuban and whatever. Because, Shark Tank, like that's the other thing. It's been glamorized. So like Shark Tank, people go on and pitch and then all the sharks are fighting over investing. That's not how it works. People are trying to figure out how not to give you money for your business. The bank is trying to figure out how to tell you no. The investors trying to tell themselves no. So that's fictionalized for television. And then entrepreneurs, I've got this idea and somebody will give me some money. And most businesses are bootstrapped. Most businesses are based on the finances of the owner, and for forever until you can get to a point of, some other event happening. And that's the side that's not discussed as much.
Yeah, the ugly side. So, how can our listeners get more involved with your work or access some of your insights? Or do you have anything that, how can they get in touch with you?
So my platform of choice nowadays is LinkedIn. And so if you find me on LinkedIn, and I have a weekly newsletter called Digitally Inclined. So I do talk a lot about kind of marketing and the impact of marketing on that. But I also love this side of it. So you'll occasionally see some things around just entrepreneurship in general and things like that. So LinkedIn, my company's Liger Partners, and you can go to ligerpartners.com to get information on us. We're a B2B marketing firm. So we work primarily in the B2B space with really boring companies to do marketing. Yeah.
And do you still have your podcast?
I do. It's called The Claw.
Perfect.
So it's primarily focused on marketing. I did the other one. It was Build Your Best Business was the one that I did around interviews with entrepreneurs and that kind of thing. The company I'm with now, we do investments in small companies. So I get to kind of spend time in the incubator space and still hang out with the brave ones, the ones who are out there building something from scratch.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Eric. This has been very enlightening. I could talk your ear off or listen to you probably would be better to put it for a while anyway. So I'll have to tune in and listen to more of your wisdom on all of this. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
I don't know about you, but I'm actually going to go back through this interview and take a few notes. If you'd like to learn anything more about Eric or anything we talked about in this episode, visit myweeklymarketing.com/67. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please subscribe. And if you like the episode, give it a rating on Apple Podcasts. I'd really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye for now.